The dust storm came out of nowhere, turning the September afternoon into a howling nightmare of sand and wind that threatened to strip the skin right off her bones. Faith Winters clutched her worn carpetbag to her chest and stumbled forward, half blind, knowing that if she stopped moving she might never start again. She had been walking for 3 days since the stagecoach broke an axle 50 miles back, the driver and other passengers heading south while she pressed on alone toward White River, South Dakota, where a teaching position supposedly waited for her. Now, as the wind screamed around her and her lungs burned with each gasping breath, Faith wondered if she would die out here on this God-forsaken prairie. Just another foolish woman who thought she could make it on her own in the Dakota Territory in 1883. Through the brown haze, she saw something solid, a dark shape that might have been a building or might have been a mirage. Faith pushed toward it with the last of her strength, her legs trembling beneath her skirts. The shape became clearer as she drew closer, revealing itself to be a barn, weathered gray wood standing defiant against the storm. She reached the door and yanked it open, tumbling inside as the wind tried to tear it from her hands. The sudden quiet was almost shocking after the roar outside. Faith collapsed onto the hay-strewn floor, gasping, her whole body shaking. "Easy there." The voice came from somewhere above her, deep and calm. "You look like you just outran the devil himself." Faith looked up to see a man descending a ladder from the hayloft. He was tall and lean, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy, dusty trousers and a worn shirt with the sleeves rolled up over tanned forearms. There was something solid and capable about him, the kind of man who knew how to survive in this harsh land. "The storm," Faith managed to say, her voice hoarse from the dust. "I could not see anything." "That storm will blow itself out in an hour or two," the man said, approaching her carefully as if she were a spooked horse. "You are lucky you found shelter when you did. Name is Seth Ashford. I work this ranch." Faith Winters. She tried to stand, but her legs would not quite cooperate. Seth reached out a hand and she took it, letting him pull her to her feet. His grip was strong and calloused, the hand of someone who worked with horses and cattle every day. "Where were you headed in this mess?" Seth asked, releasing her hand but staying close enough to catch her if she swayed. "White River. I am supposed to teach at the schoolhouse there." Faith brushed futilely at her dress, which was caked with dust. Her hair had come loose from its pins and hung in tangled waves around her shoulders. She must look absolutely wild. Seth nodded slowly. "White River is still a good 8 miles north of here. This is the Anderson Ranch, or what is left of it. Old man Anderson died last winter, and his widow could not keep the place running. I have been working here as foreman for the past year, but there is not much left to manage anymore. Most of the hands moved on to bigger operations." "Is Mrs. Anderson here?" Faith asked, glancing toward the barn door. She could still hear the wind howling outside, though it seemed to be losing some of its fury. "She sold out to a cattle company 3 months ago and moved to Rapid City to live with her daughter. They kept me on to watch the place until they figure out what to do with it. Right now it is just me, 40 head of cattle and a few horses." Seth walked over to a workbench and picked up a canteen. "You should drink something. That dust will steal all the moisture right out of you." Faith accepted the canteen gratefully and took a long drink. The water was warm but tasted like salvation. "Thank you. I did not expect to be caught out in weather like that. The sky was clear this morning." "Weather out here does not ask permission before it changes," Seth said. There was a hint of amusement in his voice, but not mockery. "You are from back east, Philadelphia. Is it that obvious?" Faith handed back the canteen and managed a weak smile. You have that look about you, like the prairie still surprises you. Seth set the canteen down and studied her with those gray eyes. What brings a Philadelphia schoolteacher all the way out to the Dakota territory? Faith felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever anyone asked about her past. There was nothing left for me there. My parents died 2 years ago, and the man I was engaged to decided he preferred someone with a larger dowry. Teaching positions in Philadelphia are hard to come by without connections, so when I saw an advertisement for a teacher in White River, I applied. They wrote back accepting me. That took courage, Seth said simply. Or desperation, Faith replied, surprised at her own honesty. There was something about this cowboy that made her want to tell the truth. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, without judgment or expectation. Seth walked to the barn door and peered out through a crack. Storm is starting to break up. Give it another half hour and the air should be clear enough to see where you are going. But you will not make it to White River before dark, and you do not want to be walking these roads after sunset. You know of anywhere I could stay? Faith asked, feeling the weight of her exhaustion settling over her like a heavy blanket. Her feet ached, her throat was raw, and every muscle in her body screamed for rest. Seth turned back to her, his expression thoughtful. The main house is locked up and I do not have a key. But you could stay here in the barn tonight if you want. It is not fancy, but it is dry and warm. I have been sleeping in the hayloft since I moved out of the bunkhouse. There is plenty of room, and I can ride into town in the morning and bring back a wagon to take you the rest of the way. Faith knew she should refuse. A proper lady did not spend the night in a barn with a strange man, no matter how kind he seemed. But propriety was a luxury she could no longer afford, and the alternative was walking 8 more miles on blistered feet in the growing darkness. I would be grateful, she said quietly. I can pay you something for your trouble. Seth shook his head. No need for that. Out here people help each other. It is the only way we survive. The storm died down just as Seth had predicted, leaving behind a world washed clean by wind. Faith sat on a bale of hay and watched as Seth moved around the barn, doing evening chores with the easy efficiency of someone who had done them 1,000 times before. He fed the horses, checked the water trough, and inspected a saddle that needed mending. There was something mesmerizing about watching him work, the way he moved with purpose and confidence. You must think me very foolish, Faith said after a while. Coming out here alone with no real plan. Seth glanced over at her from where he was brushing down a bay mare. I think you are brave. Most people would rather stay where things are comfortable, even if they are miserable. You chose to start over somewhere new. That takes strength. Or stupidity, Faith said, but she felt a warmth spreading through her chest at his words. Maybe a little of both, Seth agreed, and this time there was definite amusement in his voice. But the same could be said for anyone who chooses to make a life out here. The prairie does not forgive weakness, but it rewards those who are willing to work hard and stick it out. How long have you been in the Dakota territory? Faith asked, curious about this man who seemed so at home in a place that still felt alien to her. I was born in Wyoming, Seth said, moving on to the next horse. My father was a ranch hand and my mother took in laundry to make ends meet. I learned to ride before I could write my own name. When I was 18, I headed east to see if there was more to life than dust and cattle. Spent 2 years working on the railroad, another year in Omaha trying my hand at various jobs, but I kept feeling pulled back west. There is something about this land that gets into your blood. I ended up in South Dakota 5 years ago and have been working ranches ever since. You like it? The work, I mean. Seth paused, his hand resting on the horse's flank. I do. It is hard and the pay is not much, but there is something honest about it. You work with animals and the land, and at the end of the day you can see what you have accomplished. There is no pretense out here, no need to be anything other than what you are. Faith thought about her own life in Philadelphia, the constant pressure to say the right things and act the right way, the endless social calculations that governed every interaction. That sounds freeing. It can be, Seth said. It can also be lonely. But I guess that depends on what you are looking for. They fell into a comfortable silence after that. Seth finished with the horses and climbed up to the hayloft, returning with a couple of blankets and a pillow. "You can make yourself a bed down here," he said, handing them to her. "I will be up in the loft if you need anything. There is a lantern over on that shelf if you want some light." "Thank you," Faith said, accepting the bedding. "You have been very kind to me." Seth met her eyes, and for a moment something passed between them, a connection that Faith could not quite name. "Get some rest, Miss Winters. Tomorrow is a new day." Faith made herself as comfortable as she could on the hay, wrapping herself in the blankets. They smelled like sun and grass, and something uniquely masculine that she supposed was Seth's own scent. Through the gaps in the barn roof, she could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the loft above she could hear Seth moving around, settling in for the night. Despite everything, despite being alone in a barn in the middle of nowhere with a man she had just met, Faith felt safe. More than that, she felt something stirring inside her that she had not felt in a long time. Hope, maybe, or possibility. Whatever it was, it kept her warm as she drifted off to sleep. Morning came with golden light streaming through the barn door and the sound of roosters crowing somewhere in the distance. Faith woke slowly, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was. Her body ached from sleeping on the hay, but she felt more rested than she had in days. She sat up and saw that Seth was already awake, crouched by a small fire he had built just outside the barn door. The smell of coffee drifted toward her. "Morning," Seth called when he saw her stirring. "Coffee is almost ready if you want some." Faith stood and smoothed down her wrinkled dress, wishing desperately for a mirror and a brush. She walked out into the cool morning air and accepted the tin cup Seth handed her. The coffee was strong and black and exactly what she needed. "How did you sleep?" Seth asked. "Better than I expected," Faith admitted. "Thank you again for your hospitality." "It was nothing." Seth poured himself a cup of coffee and took a long drink. "I have been thinking about your situation. If you are going to be teaching in White River, you will need a place to live. The town does not have much in the way of boarding houses." "I was told the school board would help me find lodging," Faith said, though she had been worrying about exactly that problem. Seth nodded. "They might, but it could take time. The school board in White River is run by Henry Thompson and his wife, and they are good people but not always the most organized. In the meantime, you need somewhere to stay." "What are you suggesting?" Faith asked, curious where he was going with this. Seth looked out across the prairie, his expression thoughtful. "This barn is empty most of the time. The ranch house is locked up, but the barn is mine to use as I see fit. You could stay here for a while if you need to. I know it is not much, but it would give you time to get settled and figure things out." Faith stared at him. "You would let me stay here, in your barn?" "It is not really my barn, but the cattle company that owns it does not care what I do with it as long as the livestock is tended. There is plenty of space, and it would be safer than you trying to find something in town right away. White River is a decent place, but it has its share of rough characters, and a woman alone can attract the wrong kind of attention." Faith's first instinct was to refuse. The whole situation was improper and could ruin her reputation before she even started teaching. But then she thought about the alternative, about arriving in White River with nowhere to go and no one to vouch for her. At least here, she would have shelter while she figured things out. I could not stay for free, Faith said slowly. I would need to contribute somehow. Can you cook? Seth asked. Yes, my mother taught me. Then you can cook for both of us. I am tired of my own terrible attempts at making food. We can share supplies and you can stay as long as you need to. Seth turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious. I am not suggesting anything improper, Miss Winters. You would have your space and I would have mine. Just two people helping each other out. Faith knew she should think about it more, should weigh all the options carefully. But standing there in the morning light with the smell of coffee and prairie grass all around her, she found herself nodding. All right, thank you, I accept your offer. A smile crossed Seth's face, transforming his features from serious to almost boyish. Good. Then let us ride into White River and let the school board know you have arrived. We can pick up some supplies while we are there. Seth saddled 2 horses, a gentle gray mare for Faith and a larger chestnut gelding for himself. Faith had ridden a few times back in Philadelphia, mostly sedate trots through city parks, but this was different. The mare responded to the slightest touch, and as they set off across the prairie with the morning sun warming their backs, Faith felt a thrill of exhilaration run through her. They rode in silence for a while, the landscape rolling past in waves of golden grass and distant hills. Faith had never experienced so much open space before. In Philadelphia, buildings pressed close on all sides, creating a sense of enclosure. Here, the sky seemed to go on forever, and the only sounds were the wind and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. It is beautiful, Faith said, surprised by how much she meant it. Seth glanced over at her. It grows on you. I have seen men go mad from the loneliness of it, but I have also seen men find peace here that they never could anywhere else. What about women? Faith asked. Women too, Seth said. Though women out here tend to be a different breed than the ones back east, they have to be tough to survive. Do you think I am tough enough? The question came out before Faith could stop it. Seth studied her with those penetrating gray eyes. I think you might surprise yourself. You made it this far, did you not? White River turned out to be a small but bustling town, with a main street lined with false-fronted buildings that included a general store, a saloon, a church, and various other establishments. People moved along the wooden sidewalks with purpose, and Faith noticed that nearly everyone they passed nodded a greeting to Seth. He seemed to be well-known and well-liked. They stopped at the general store first, where Seth introduced Faith to the owner, a portly man named Carl Peterson. This is Miss Winters, Seth said. She is the new school teacher. Carl's face lit up. The school teacher. Well, it is about time you arrived. Martha Thompson has been beside herself wondering when you would get here. The school term was supposed to start last week. Faith felt a flutter of anxiety. I am sorry. The journey took longer than I expected. No matter, Carl said, waving a hand. We are just glad you are here. The children have been running wild without a teacher. You should go see Martha right away. She lives in the white house at the end of the street, the one with the green shutters. Seth and Faith found Martha Thompson in her garden, pulling weeds from around a row of carrots. She was a round, cheerful woman in her 50s with graying hair and bright blue eyes. When Seth explained who Faith was, Martha let out a cry of delight and pulled Faith into a hug that smelled like earth and lavender. Oh, we have been so worried about you, dear. Your last letter said you would arrive 2 weeks ago, and when you did not show up, we feared something terrible had happened. The stagecoach had an accident, Faith explained. I had to walk part of the way and then I got caught in a dust storm yesterday. Mr. Ashford was kind enough to give me shelter. Martha's eyes flicked between Faith and Seth, and Faith saw a calculating expression cross the older woman's face. "I see. Well, we are just grateful you are safe. Now we need to get you settled. I had arranged for you to board with the widow Miller, but she had to leave town suddenly to care for her sick sister in Yankton. Let me think about who else might have room." "Actually," Seth said, "Miss Winters is staying out at the Anderson place for now. She can stay there while you figure out something more permanent." Martha's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "The Anderson place? But Seth, that is just you out there now, is it not?" "It is a large barn," Seth said calmly. "Plenty of room for 2 people to stay without impropriety. Miss Winters needed a place quickly, and I had space to offer." Faith watched as Martha processed this information. She could see the older woman weighing the scandal of the situation against the practicality of it. Finally, Martha sighed. "Well, I suppose it will have to do until we find something better. But Faith, dear, you must come to church on Sunday so everyone can see that you are a respectable young woman. First impressions are important in a small town." "Of course," Faith said quickly. "I would be happy to." They spent another hour in town, picking up supplies and meeting various townspeople. Everyone seemed genuinely glad to have a teacher again, and Faith felt some of her anxiety easing. By the time they headed back to the ranch, the sun was high overhead and Faith's head was spinning with names and faces. "Martha Thompson is a good woman," Seth said as they rode. "She can be a bit of a gossip, but her heart is in the right place. She will look after you." "She seems to think highly of you," Faith observed. Seth shrugged. "I have done some work for her husband over the years, fixed fences, helped with their cattle. They are decent people." When they arrived back at the barn, Seth helped Faith unload the supplies they had purchased. She had bought fabric to make curtains and a new dress, along with food staples and a few books. It was not much, but it felt like the beginning of something. "I will help you set up a proper living space," Seth said, surveying the barn. "We can partition off a section in the corner for you, give you some privacy. There is an old stove in the back that we can move over. It will be comfortable enough." They worked together through the afternoon, and Faith found herself enjoying the physical labor. Seth was patient and showed her how to do things without making her feel foolish. By evening, she had a cozy corner of the barn that felt almost like a real room. The curtains she had bought hung from a rope Seth strung up, creating walls. The stove was positioned near her area, and Seth brought in a real bed frame from one of the outbuildings that was much better than sleeping on hay. "This is wonderful," Faith said, looking around at her new home. "Thank you, Seth." He smiled at her, and Faith felt her heart skip a little. "You are welcome. Now I believe you promised to cook." Faith laughed and set about making their first dinner together. She had bought potatoes, onions, salt pork, and flour, along with canned tomatoes and beans. It was simple fare, but she made a hearty stew that filled the barn with delicious smells. They ate sitting on hay bales, using overturned crates as a table. "This is the best meal I have had in months," Seth said, scraping his bowl clean. "You can definitely cook." "My mother believed every woman should be self-sufficient," Faith said. "She taught me to cook, sew, keep accounts, and read. My father thought it was all unnecessary since I would just get married, but my mother insisted. Your mother sounds like a wise woman." She was. Faith felt the familiar ache of loss. "I miss her every day." Seth nodded, his expression understanding. "I lost my mother when I was 23. She got pneumonia one winter and never recovered. My father followed her within the year. I think he died of a broken heart as much as anything else." "I am sorry," Faith said softly. "Life out here is hard," Seth said. "People die young sometimes. That is why it is important to make the most of the time we have." Over the following days, Faith and Seth fell into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Faith would wake early and make breakfast while Seth tended to the livestock. Then he would ride her into town for her teaching duties. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building with a wood stove and rough-hewn benches. Faith had 15 students ranging in age from 6 to 14, a mix of farm children and town kids who eyed her with curiosity and suspicion. Teaching was harder than Faith had expected. The children had been without instruction for months, and many of them had never had much schooling to begin with. Some could barely read, while others were sharp and eager to learn. Faith spent her days teaching reading, arithmetic, history, and geography, trying to keep all the different age groups engaged. In the evenings, she would return to the barn exhausted but satisfied. Seth was always there, having spent his day working with the cattle or mending fences or doing the 100 other tasks that kept a ranch running. Faith would cook dinner while Seth cleaned up, and then they would sit together and talk. Faith learned that Seth loved horses more than cattle, that he had once dreamed of breeding his own line of ranch horses, but never had the capital to start. She learned that he could play the harmonica, and sometimes did in the evenings, filling the barn with melancholy tunes. She learned that he was thoughtful and kind, slow to anger but fierce in his loyalties. Seth learned that Faith had a quick mind and a sharp wit, that she could quote Shakespeare and discuss philosophy, but also appreciated a good joke. He learned that she was afraid of spiders but could handle a snake without flinching. He learned that she sang while she cooked, soft songs her mother had taught her. They never touched beyond the occasional brush of hands when passing something, but Faith found herself increasingly aware of Seth's presence. The way he moved, the sound of his voice, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. She told herself it was just gratitude, that she was drawn to him because he had helped her when she needed it. But late at night, lying in her partitioned section of the barn, she would hear him moving around in the loft and feel something warm and yearning in her chest. 3 weeks after Faith arrived in White River, Martha Thompson invited them both to Sunday dinner. It was the kind of invitation that could not be refused without giving offense, so Faith put on her best dress and Seth wore his cleanest shirt, and they rode into town together. The Thompson house was comfortable and well appointed, with lace curtains and a pump organ in the parlor. Martha's husband Henry was a tall, thin man with a gray beard and gentle manner. They had 2 grown children who no longer lived at home, and Martha clearly missed having young people around. Dinner was pot roast with potatoes and carrots, followed by apple pie. Martha kept up a steady stream of conversation, asking Faith about the school and how the children were progressing. Seth mostly listened, occasionally answering direct questions but otherwise content to let the women talk. After dinner, while Martha and Faith cleared the dishes, Henry pulled Seth aside. Faith could hear their low voices from the kitchen but could not make out the words. "That Seth is a good man," Martha said, handing Faith a dish to dry. "He has had a hard life, but it has not made him bitter." "That is rare. He has been very kind to me," Faith said carefully. Martha gave her a knowing look. "I have seen the way you two look at each other when you think no one is watching. There is something growing there." Faith felt her cheeks heat. "I am just grateful for his help, that is all." Martha said, clearly not believing her. "You could do worse than Seth Ashford, you know. He may not have much in the way of money, but he is honest and hardworking. Those qualities are worth more than gold out here." Before Faith could respond, the men returned from the parlor. Henry was smiling and Seth looked pleased about something. "What were you two discussing?" Martha asked. "Business," Henry said. "Just business." On the ride back to the ranch, Faith asked Seth what Henry had wanted to talk about. "He offered me a job," Seth said. "His ranch hand is moving on and he needs someone reliable. The pay is better than what I make now, and it would be steady work. That is wonderful, Faith said, though she felt an unexpected twist of anxiety. Will you take it? Seth was quiet for a moment. I do not know yet. It would mean leaving the Anderson place. The cattle company would have to find someone else to watch it. What would happen to the barn? Faith asked, her voice small. She had come to think of that barn as home, strange as it was. I suppose the company would want to lock it up, keep vagrants out. Seth glanced at her. You would need to find somewhere else to stay. The thought of leaving the barn, of not seeing Seth every day, filled Faith with a sense of loss that was entirely disproportionate to the situation. They had known each other less than a month. She should be thinking practically about her future, not worrying about a cowboy she barely knew. But as they rode through the gathering darkness, Faith realized that somewhere along the way, Seth Ashford had become important to her. More than important. Essential. That night, Faith lay awake for a long time, thinking about what Martha had said. Was it so obvious that she was developing feelings for Seth? And if it was obvious to Martha, was it obvious to Seth as well? The thought mortified and thrilled her in equal measure. The next morning, Faith woke to find Seth already gone. He had left a note saying he had ridden out to check on some cattle in the far pasture and would be back by evening. Faith went through her morning routine mechanically, her mind elsewhere. At school, she tried to focus on her lessons, but the children seemed particularly unruly. Tommy Richards, a 12-year-old with a mean streak, kept pulling the hair of the girl in front of him. Annie Peterson could not stop giggling. Even normally well-behaved Sarah Thompson seemed distracted. Children, Faith said, her voice sharp. If you cannot pay attention, we will all stay late and practice our multiplication tables. That got their attention. The rest of the afternoon proceeded more smoothly, but Faith was grateful when the final bell rang and she could dismiss everyone. She was locking up the schoolhouse when a man approached her. He was probably in his 40s, well-dressed in a suit that seemed out of place in White River. He had cold blue eyes and a smile that did not reach them. Miss Winters, the man said, I am Walter Garrett. I own the Dakota Cattle Company. Faith recognized the name. That was the company that had bought the Anderson Ranch. Mr. Garrett, what can I do for you? I wanted to introduce myself and welcome you to White River. I understand you have been staying at one of my properties, the old Anderson place. There was something in his tone that put Faith on edge. Seth Ashford kindly offered me shelter while I get settled. I hope that is all right. Oh, certainly, certainly, Garrett said, though his smile remained cold. Seth is a good worker, very reliable. I just wanted to make sure you understood the situation. The Anderson property is company land now, and we will be making some changes in the coming months. I would hate for you to be displaced without warning. What kind of changes? Faith asked. We are consolidating our operations. The Anderson place is not profitable as a standalone ranch, so we will likely tear down the buildings and use the land for grazing. Seth has been informed that his position will end in December. December was only 2 months away. Faith felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. I see. Thank you for letting me know. Of course. I am sure the school board will help you find proper lodging. A young lady like yourself should not be living in a barn anyway. It gives the wrong impression. Garrett tipped his hat. Good day, Miss Winters. Faith watched him walk away, anger and anxiety churning inside her. The wrong impression. As if there was anything improper about her arrangement with Seth. They were two people helping each other survive in a harsh land. But she knew how it would look to someone like Garrett, someone who judged based on appearances rather than reality. When Seth returned that evening, Faith told him about the encounter. His expression darkened. Garrett is a snake, Seth said flatly. He bought up half a dozen small ranches last year, promising to keep on the existing workers. Then he let most of them go and brought in his own people. I knew my time here was limited, but I did not expect him to come after you. He was not coming after me, Faith said. He was just letting me know about the changes. He was warning you away from me, Seth corrected. Garrett likes to control everything in his sphere. The fact that I offered you shelter without asking his permission probably galled him. Faith sat down on a hay bale, suddenly exhausted. What are we going to do? Seth crouched down in front of her, his gray eyes serious. I will take Henry Thompson's offer. It is good work and it will give me stability, and you will find proper lodging in town. Martha will help you. This was always meant to be temporary anyway. I know, Faith said, but her voice came out barely above a whisper. I just thought we would have more time. Seth reached out and took her hand, the first real contact they had shared beyond accidental brushes. His palm was warm and rough against hers. Faith, there is something I need to say, and I am not good with words, so I am just going to say it plain. These past weeks with you have been the best I have known in a long time. Maybe ever. I look forward to seeing you every morning and hearing about your day every evening. I like the way you hum while you cook, and the way you get this little furrow between your eyebrows when you are thinking hard about something. I like everything about you, if I am being honest. Faith's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Seth. Let me finish, he said gently. I know I am just a cowboy with no prospects beyond whatever ranch will hire me. I know you are an educated woman who could do better. But if you are willing, I would like to court you properly. I would like to see if this thing between us could become something more. Faith looked at his serious face, at the hope and vulnerability in his eyes, and felt something inside her break open. I would like that very much, she said. I have felt the same way. I was just afraid to say anything. Seth's face split into a grin, that rare, transforming smile that made him look years younger. Really, really, Faith said, and then she was laughing, and Seth was laughing too, and the worry about Garrett and the ranch faded into insignificance compared to the joy of this moment. Seth lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his lips warm against her skin. I will do right by you, Faith Winters. I promise you that. I know you will, Faith said, and she meant it. The next few weeks were simultaneously the happiest and most complicated of Faith's life. Seth began working for Henry Thompson, which meant he had to move into the bunkhouse at the Thompson Ranch. Faith stayed at the Anderson barn, but now she was truly alone there. Martha Thompson found her a room to rent with an elderly widow named Mrs. Fletcher, who lived 2 streets over from the schoolhouse, and Faith knew she should take it. But she kept putting off the move, reluctant to leave the place that had become her first real home in the Dakota territory. Seth rode out to visit her every evening after work, and they would spend a few hours together before he had to ride back. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and dreams. Seth told her about the ranch he wanted to own someday, a place where he could breed horses and build something lasting. Faith told him about her desire to start a lending library in White River, to bring books and education to people who had never had access to them. They were careful to maintain propriety. Seth never came into her partitioned area, and they made sure to stay in public view. But the attraction between them was undeniable. Faith would catch Seth looking at her with such warmth that it made her breath catch. She knew she looked at him the same way. One evening in late October, as they sat outside the barn watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Seth said, I have been saving money for years. Working every ranch job I could get, living cheap, putting away every spare dollar. I have almost enough to make a down payment on land of my own. That is wonderful, Faith said. Where would you want to buy? There is a piece of property about 20 miles west of here. It is not much, maybe 80 acres, but it has good water and decent grazing. The owner is getting old and wants to sell. If I can come up with another $200, I could buy it outright. $200 was a fortune. Faith knew Seth's wages could not be more than $30 a month, and he had expenses. How long would it take you to save that much? Maybe 2 years if I am careful, Seth said. 3 if there are any setbacks. Faith thought about what it would be like to wait 3 years to see Seth's dream realized. 3 years of him working someone else's land, living in someone else's bunkhouse. 3 years of uncertainty. What if there was another way? Faith said slowly. What if we combined our resources? Seth looked at her, his eyes sharp. What do you mean? I have some money saved, Faith said. Not much, but my parents left me a small inheritance, about $300. I was saving it for emergencies, but this feels like a good use of it. We could buy that land together. Faith, I could not ask you to do that, Seth said, but she could see the longing in his face. You are not asking, I am offering. Faith turned to face him fully. Seth, I know we have not known each other long, but I believe in you. I believe in us. If you want to build a ranch, I want to help you do it. We could be partners. Partners, Seth repeated, testing the word. Is that what you want, to be my partner? Faith took a deep breath. I want to be more than that if I am being honest, but I know it is too soon to talk about marriage. So for now, yes, partners. Seth was quiet for a long moment, and Faith's heart sank. She had pushed too hard, revealed too much. But then Seth reached out and cupped her face in his calloused hand, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. Faith Winters, you are the most extraordinary woman I have ever met, he said. If you are willing to take a chance on me, then I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret it. Partners now, and maybe someday more if you will have me. I will have you, Faith whispered, and then Seth was kissing her, his lips warm and sure against hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but it quickly deepened into something that made Faith's toes curl and her heart race. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. I love you, Seth said, the words falling from his lips like a confession. I think I have loved you since you stumbled into my barn half dead from that dust storm. I love you too, Faith said, and saying it out loud felt like setting down a burden she had been carrying for too long. I think I have loved you since you offered me water and did not laugh at me for being foolish enough to walk across the prairie alone. They sat together until the stars came out, making plans and dreaming dreams. By the time Seth reluctantly left to ride back to the Thompson ranch, they had decided to buy the land together. They would marry as soon as it was decent, maybe in the spring, and begin building their ranch. The following week, Seth and Faith went together to meet with the landowner, a grizzled old rancher named Moses Parker, who had been working his land since before the war between the states. He looked at them with skeptical eyes when they explained what they wanted. You two married? Moses asked bluntly. Not yet, Seth said. But we will be. You got the money. Seth produced his savings and Faith added her inheritance. Together they had exactly $512, which was precisely what Moses was asking for the 80 acres. Moses counted the money twice, then nodded. All right then. The land is yours. I will draw up the papers and we can make it official next week. You are getting good land, son. Treat it right and it will treat you right. They shook on it, and as they walked out of Moses's house, Faith felt like she was floating. They owned land. She and Seth owned 80 acres of the Dakota territory. We need to make plans, Seth said as they rode back to White River. I will need to give Henry notice. It will take time to build a house and get everything set up for the horses. How long do you think? Faith asked. 6 months at least. maybe longer. There is a lot of work to do. Then we should get married now, Faith said. Why wait? Seth pulled his horse to a stop and looked at her. Are you sure? We could wait until things are more settled. I have never been more sure of anything, Faith said. I do not want to wait, do you? No, Seth admitted, but people will talk. We have only known each other 2 months. Let them talk, Faith said firmly. We know what we feel. That is all that matters. Seth broke into that rare, beautiful smile. All right then, let us get married. They were wed 3 weeks later in the White River Church with Martha and Henry Thompson serving as witnesses. Faith wore a simple blue dress she had sewn herself, and Seth wore his best shirt and had gotten a haircut for the occasion. The ceremony was brief, just the essentials, but when Seth slipped a simple gold band on Faith's finger, she felt her eyes fill with tears. You may kiss your bride, the minister said, and Seth did gently and sweetly while Martha sniffled happily in the front pew. After the ceremony, Martha insisted on hosting a small reception at her house. Half the town showed up, bringing food and gifts and good wishes. Faith was overwhelmed by the kindness of these people who had been strangers just months ago. Late in the afternoon, Walter Garrett appeared at the door. Faith saw Martha's expression tighten, but good manners required that they welcome him. Congratulations on your marriage, Garrett said to Seth, his cold smile in place. I hope you two will be very happy. Thank you, Seth said evenly. I understand you have bought the Parker place, Garrett continued. Bold move for a cowboy with no capital. I hope you know what you are getting into. We know exactly what we are getting into, Faith said, stepping up beside Seth. We are building a life together. Garrett's gaze shifted to her, and there was something calculating in it. Well, if you ever need assistance, the Dakota Cattle Company is always looking to expand. I would be happy to discuss options. We will keep that in mind, Seth said, his tone making it clear that they would do no such thing. After Garrett left, Henry pulled Seth aside. Watch out for that man, Henry said quietly. He does not like people who succeed outside his control. He will try to cause problems for you. Let him try, Seth said. Faith and I have each other. That is all we need. Faith and Seth spent their first night as a married couple in the barn at the Anderson place, which seemed fitting given where their story had started. Seth had hung blankets to create more privacy and brought in flowers to make the space special. They made love slowly and carefully, both of them nervous and eager, learning each other's bodies with the same attention they had learned each other's hearts. Afterwards, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Faith felt a peace she had never known. Seth stroked her hair, his fingers gentle. I meant what I said, he murmured. You will never regret choosing me. I know, Faith said. And you will never regret choosing me either. I am going to be the best partner you could ask for. You already are, Seth said and kissed her forehead. In the morning, they began the work of building their future. Seth kept working for Henry Thompson to maintain income while also spending every spare moment on their land. Faith continued teaching, adding her salary to their savings. On weekends, they worked together, clearing brush and marking out where they would build. Seth designed a simple but sturdy house, one room for now with the ability to add more later. He hired a few men from town to help with the heavy construction, and Faith packed lunches and brought water while also doing what she could to assist. She learned to measure and saw, to hammer nails straight, to think about weight and balance and structural integrity. As the house began to take shape, Faith felt a fierce pride. This was theirs, built with their own hands and their shared dreams. Every board they nailed in place, every window they installed, represented a promise they were making to each other and to the future. Winter came hard and fast that year, with snow arriving in mid-November and temperatures plummeting. Work on the house had to stop, but they had managed to get the walls up and the roof on before the worst of the weather hit. Seth moved supplies into the unfinished house to protect them from the elements, and they made plans for what they would do in the spring. Faith moved in with Mrs. Fletcher as originally planned, since the barn was no longer available and their own house was not yet livable. Seth stayed in the Thompson bunkhouse. They saw each other on weekends and Wednesday evenings, and Faith lived for those times. Every day apart felt like an eternity. Christmas came, and Faith gave Seth a book about horse breeding she had ordered from a catalog. Seth gave her a beautiful wooden box he had carved himself, with flowers etched into the lid. Inside were a dozen letters he had written her, one for each week they had been married, expressing feelings he was too shy to say aloud. Faith cried reading them that night, overwhelmed by the depth of Seth's love. He was a man of few words, but the words he chose were perfect. The winter seemed to last forever, but finally March arrived with the promise of spring. As soon as the ground thawed enough, Seth resumed work on their house. He finished the interior walls, installed a proper stove, and built furniture to fill the rooms. Faith made curtains and quilts, turning the empty shell into a real home. By late April, the house was finished enough to live in. Faith gave notice to Mrs. Fletcher, and Seth told Henry he would be leaving to focus on his own operation. They moved into their new home on a warm Saturday afternoon, carrying in boxes and furniture and all the accumulated possessions of their new life together. That night, lying in their own bed in their own house on their own land, Faith felt like she had finally come home. Not to a place but to a person, to Seth and the life they were building together. "What are you thinking?" Seth asked, pulling her closer. "I am thinking about how strange life is," Faith said. 6 months ago I was alone and scared, walking across the prairie with nowhere to go, and now I am here with you and I have never been happier. "That dust storm brought you to me," Seth said. "Best storm that ever happened." "You gave me more than shelter that day," Faith said. "You gave me a future, you gave me hope." "You gave me something too," Seth said. "Something no hired hand ever had." "What is that?" "Your loyalty, your faith in me. You believed I could build something, and you were willing to risk everything to help me do it. That kind of loyalty is more valuable than any money or land." Faith rolled over to face him, her hand resting on his chest where she could feel his heartbeat. "We are partners, remember. What you build, I build. What I create, you create. We are in this together." "Together," Seth agreed and kissed her. Spring turned to summer and the ranch began to take shape. Seth bought 3 mares and a stallion, carefully selected foundation stock for the breeding program he wanted to start. Faith turned part of the barn they built into a stable that could be expanded as the herd grew. They planted a garden and put up fences and slowly, painfully, began to make the land productive. Money was tight. There were weeks when they ate nothing but beans and cornbread, when Seth had to take odd jobs in town to make ends meet. But they never went hungry and they never lost faith. Every small success, every foal born healthy, every fence completed, felt like a victory. Faith continued teaching through that first year on the ranch, though it meant a long ride into White River and back 5 days a week. She was exhausted most of the time, but the money from her teaching salary kept them afloat through those difficult first months. In August, Faith realized her monthly courses had stopped. She waited another 2 weeks to be sure, then told Seth over breakfast one morning. "I am pregnant," she said simply. "We are going to have a baby." Seth dropped his coffee cup and it shattered on the floor. He barely noticed. "A baby." "We are having a baby." "Yes," Faith said, starting to smile at his shocked expression. "Are you happy?" Seth pulled her out of her chair and into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. Happy does not begin to cover it. Faith, this is everything. Everything. They danced around the kitchen, both laughing like children, planning and dreaming about the baby who would arrive in the spring. Seth immediately became overprotective, insisting Faith cut back on her workload and rest more. Faith tolerated his fussing with good humor, knowing it came from love. She continued teaching through December, then reluctantly gave notice to the school board. Martha Thompson cried when Faith told her she was leaving, but she understood. "You have to think of yourself and the baby now," Martha said, "but we will miss you terribly. You have been wonderful with the children." "I will miss them too," Faith said honestly, "but I need to be at the ranch now. Seth cannot manage everything alone." Winter came again, and Faith spent the cold months preparing for the baby. She sewed tiny clothes and knitted blankets. Seth built a cradle from pine wood, carving horses into the headboard. They talked about names and argued good-naturedly about whether they wanted a boy or a girl. "I hope it is a son," Seth said one evening. "A boy to help with the ranch." "I hope it is healthy," Faith said. "That is all I care about." In early March, Faith went into labor. Seth rode into town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Johansson who had delivered half the babies in White River. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Seth stayed by Faith's side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. Finally, as the sun was setting on that second day, Faith gave birth to a boy. He came into the world red-faced and screaming, announcing his presence with impressive lung power. "You have a son, Mrs. Johansson said, laying the baby on Faith's chest. "And he is perfect." Faith looked down at the tiny, furious face and fell instantly, irrevocably in love. "Hello, little one," she whispered. Seth was crying openly, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his wife and son. "He is beautiful." "You are beautiful. Faith, thank you." They named him Samuel after Seth's father, with the middle name of William after Faith's father. Little Samuel Ashford, heir to 80 acres and 2 people's worth of dreams. The next few months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings. Faith had never been so exhausted in her life, but she had also never been so content. Watching Seth with Samuel, seeing the gentle way he held his son and talked to him, made her fall in love with her husband all over again. Seth was a natural father, patient and devoted. He would walk Samuel around the ranch, showing him the horses and telling him stories about what they would do together when Samuel was older. He changed diapers without complaint and sang lullabies in his rough voice. By summer, they had settled into a routine. The ranch was doing better, with 2 new foals born that spring and interest from neighboring ranchers in Seth's breeding program. Money was still tight, but no longer desperate. They could afford small luxuries now, like coffee and sugar that was not strictly rationed. One evening in July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset with Samuel asleep between them, Seth said, "Do you ever regret it? Leaving Philadelphia, coming out here, tying yourself to me?" Faith looked at him in surprise. "Never. Not for a single moment. This is the life I was meant to have." "Even though it is hard. Even though we struggle, especially because of that," Faith said. "Everything we have, we built together. That makes it meaningful. Back in Philadelphia, I was just going through the motions, waiting for my real life to start. This is my real life, Seth, here with you." Seth reached over and took her hand. "I love you more every day. I did not think that was possible, but it is." "I love you too," Faith said. "You and Samuel are my whole world." As the years passed, the ranch grew and prospered. Seth's reputation as a horse breeder spread, and people came from all over the territory to buy his stock. He hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men who lived in the bunkhouse Seth built and took their meals with the family. Faith started her lending library, converting one room of their house into a small collection that people from White River and the surrounding area could borrow from. She also began teaching again, giving lessons to the children of neighboring ranchers who could not make the trip into town regularly. Samuel grew into a bright, curious boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's quick mind. Faith had another baby when Samuel was 3, a daughter they named Rose. Then came another son, James, 2 years after Rose. Their house expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Seth adding rooms as they needed them. Walter Garrett made several attempts over the years to buy their land or cause problems for their operation, but Seth and Faith stood firm. They had built something real and lasting, and they were not about to let Garrett or anyone else take it from them. By their 10th anniversary, the Ashford Ranch was one of the most successful small operations in the region. Seth had his herd of quality horses, Faith had her library and teaching work, and their children were healthy and happy. They still worked hard, still struggled sometimes, but they did it together. On a warm September evening, Faith stood in the yard watching Seth work with a young horse in the corral. Samuel sat on the fence, observing intently, while Rose and James played nearby. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and Faith felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. Seth noticed her watching and smiled, that rare, beautiful smile she still treasured after all these years. He handed the horse off to one of the ranch hands and walked over to her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "Just remembering," Faith said. "Remembering the day I stumbled into your barn, scared and alone and desperate." "Best day of my life," Seth said. "Mine too," Faith agreed. "Everything good in my life started that day. You offered me the barn and I offered you loyalty. It was the best bargain I ever made." "It was not just loyalty," Seth said softly. "It was love. You loved me before you even knew you did. And I loved you from the moment you looked at me with those defiant eyes and refused to give up." "We have built a good life," Faith said. "The best life," Seth corrected. "And we are not finished yet. We have years ahead of us, you and me. Years to watch our children grow, to build this ranch into something even bigger, to just be together." Faith leaned into him, feeling safe and loved and completely at home. "I am looking forward to every single one of those years." They stood there together as the sun set over their land, their children playing nearby, their future stretched out before them full of promise. Faith thought about the frightened woman she had been 10 years ago, walking alone across the prairie with nothing but a carpet bag and desperate hope. That woman would not recognize the person Faith had become, strong, confident, deeply loved and loving in return. Seth had offered her shelter from a storm, but he had given her so much more. He had given her a home, a family, a purpose. He had believed in her when she barely believed in herself. He had shown her that loyalty and love were not weaknesses, but the greatest strengths a person could possess. And in return, Faith had given him her loyalty, yes, but also her heart, her dreams, her very self. She had stood beside him through hardship and joy, through failures and successes. She had been his partner in the truest sense, helping him build something that would last long after they were gone. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Faith made a silent promise to that frightened woman from 10 years ago. She promised that every difficult step, every moment of doubt and fear, had been worth it. She promised that love was real, that loyalty mattered, that two people working together could build something beautiful from nothing. Seth pulled her closer and Faith closed her eyes, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. This was home. This was love. This was everything. The years continued to roll by in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Samuel grew into a young man who was the image of his father, tall and serious with those same gray eyes. He had a natural gift with horses that made Seth's chest swell with pride. Rose developed her mother's love of learning and could often be found curled up with a book from the library. James was the wild one, always exploring, always getting into trouble, always making everyone laugh. Faith and Seth's love only deepened with time. They had their disagreements, of course, moments of frustration and tension. But they never went to bed angry, never let pride keep them from apologizing. They had learned too well how precious their partnership was to let anything damage it. When Samuel turned 20, he married a sweet-natured girl from White River named Emma. Seth built them a house on the eastern edge of the property, and Samuel took over more of the day-to-day ranch operations. Rose announced her intention to become a teacher like her mother, much to Faith's delight. James talked about going to Denver to see the city, though Faith secretly hoped he would choose to stay. On Faith and Seth's 20th anniversary, their children surprised them with a celebration. The whole community turned out, people from White River and the surrounding ranches, all coming to honor the couple who had built something lasting from nothing. Martha Thompson, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, cornered Faith during the party. "I told you that boy was worth taking a chance on," she said with a satisfied smile. "You did," Faith agreed, laughing. "You were right." "I am always right," Martha said. "That is what comes from living long enough to see things work out." As the party wound down and the stars came out, Faith and Seth slipped away from the crowd to stand in the spot where their house had first been built. The original structure had been expanded and improved over the years, but the heart of it remained the same. 20 years, Seth said, shaking his head in wonder. "It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all." "I know what you mean," Faith said. "Sometimes I still feel like that scared girl who stumbled into your barn, but then I look at everything we have built and I realize how far we have come." "You were never just a scared girl," Seth said. "You were always brave, you just did not know it yet." "You taught me to be brave," Faith said. "You believed in me when no one else did." "I believed in us," Seth corrected, "and I was right too." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of their children and grandchildren, yes, grandchildren now. Samuel and Emma had blessed them with 2, laughing and celebrating inside. "You think about that dust storm?" Faith asked. "The one that brought me to you?" "Sometimes," Seth said. "I think about how easily things could have gone differently. If you had turned left instead of right, if you had collapsed before reaching the barn, if I had been out on the range instead of in the loft. So many things that had to happen exactly right for us to find each other." "I do not believe in fate," Faith said, "but I believe in that storm. I believe it brought me exactly where I needed to be." Seth pulled her close, and Faith rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the familiar comfort of his embrace. They had weathered so many storms together over the years, both literal and figurative. Droughts that killed their crops, harsh winters that decimated the livestock, illnesses and accidents and heartbreaks. But they had survived all of it because they had each other. "I love you," Faith said. "Just as much now as I did that first day, maybe even more." "More," Seth agreed. "Always more. Every day I think I cannot possibly love you more than I already do, and then the next day proves me wrong." They went back inside to their family and friends, their hands clasped together as they had been for 20 years. The party continued late into the night, filled with music and laughter and love. As Faith watched Seth dance with Rose while Samuel played his harmonica and James clapped along, she felt a completeness that was almost overwhelming. This was what mattered. Not money or status or the opinions of people back east who had never understood why she left. This Right here was everything. The years rolled on. Samuel and Emma had 3 more children. Rose married a lawyer from Rapid City and moved away, though she visited often. James surprised everyone by settling down with a widow who had 2 young children of her own, instantly making him a father and bringing even more life to the ranch. Faith's hair turned gray at the temples, then silver, then white. Seth developed a limp from an old injury that never quite healed right. But their love remained constant, a steady flame that warmed everyone around them. They became the elder statesmen of the community, the couple that young people came to for advice and old people came to for companionship. Their house was always open, their table always welcoming. Faith's library had grown to fill an entire building Seth constructed for her, and people came from all over the region to borrow books and attend the reading circles Faith organized. The ranch prospered under Samuel's management, with James working alongside his older brother. Seth gradually stepped back from the daily operations, though he still worked with the horses he loved so much. Faith cut back on her teaching but continued her library work, finding joy in introducing children to the magic of reading. On their 30th anniversary, they took a rare trip away from the ranch, traveling to Rapid City to visit Rose and her family. It was strange being away from home, sleeping in unfamiliar beds and walking city streets instead of open prairie. But it was also wonderful to spend time with their daughter and see how she had built her own life. On the train ride home, Faith watched the landscape roll by and thought about all the miles she had traveled in her life. From Philadelphia to the Dakota Territory, from frightened girl to confident woman, from solitude to a family that numbered in the dozens. It had been quite a journey. "No regrets?" Seth asked, as if reading her mind. "Not a single one," Faith said. "How about you?" "My only regret is that we do not have more lifetimes to spend together," Seth said. "One does not feel like enough." Faith squeezed his hand. "Then we will have to make the most of the one we have." They returned to a ranch that ran smoothly without them, proof that their children had learned their lessons well. Samuel had expanded the horse breeding program and was gaining a reputation throughout the territory. James had started raising cattle alongside the horses, diversifying their operation. The grandchildren were growing up strong and capable, ready to take on the legacy their grandparents had built. As they settled back into the rhythm of ranch life, Faith found herself thinking more and more about legacy. What would she and Seth leave behind when they were gone? The land, certainly, and the ranch. But more than that, they would leave the example of what 2 people could accomplish when they worked together, when they chose loyalty and love over everything else. One spring evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Faith said, "I want to write it all down, our story. So the grandchildren will know how it all started." "What story?" Seth asked. "Our story. How we met, how we built this place. I do not want it to be forgotten." Seth smiled. "I do not think anyone could forget you stumbling into that barn half dead from a dust storm." "That is exactly the kind of detail I want to preserve," Faith said. "All the little moments that made us who we are." So Faith began writing, spending her mornings putting their history down on paper. She wrote about the dust storm and the barn, about the early days of struggle and hope. She wrote about buying the land and building their house, about Samuel's birth and the growth of their family. She wrote about hard winters and beautiful springs, about losses and triumphs, about a love that had sustained them through everything. Seth would read what she had written in the evenings, sometimes correcting a detail or adding something she had forgotten. It became their shared project, a gift to the future generations who would inherit what they had built. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. More grandchildren arrived, then great-grandchildren. The ranch that had started with 80 acres and 4 horses now sprawled across hundreds of acres with dozens of prime breeding stock. The Ashford name was known throughout the region as synonymous with quality and integrity. Faith and Seth grew old together, their bodies slowing but their minds remaining sharp. They spent more time sitting than working, more time remembering than planning. But they were content, surrounded by the fruits of their labor and the love of their enormous family. On a warm September morning, 43 years after that fateful dust storm, Faith woke to find Seth still sleeping beside her. She watched him breathe, studied the lines on his face that she knew as well as her own. He was still handsome to her, still the cowboy who had offered her shelter and changed her life forever. "I love you," she whispered, and Seth's eyes opened. He smiled at her, that same smile that had stolen her heart decades ago. "I love you too," he said. "Always have, always will." They lay there together, hands clasped, watching the morning light creep across the ceiling. Outside they could hear the sounds of the ranch waking up, horses nickering and cattle lowing and people starting their day. Sounds that had been the soundtrack to their life together. "It has been a good life," Faith said. "The best life," Seth corrected, as he always did, "because I lived it with you." They rose and dressed and went about their day, which was much like every other day they had shared. Breakfast with family, time spent on their individual pursuits, meals together, conversations and laughter and the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other completely. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, they sat together on the porch. Their children and grandchildren were scattered around the yard, multiple generations playing and working and simply being together. The ranch stretched out before them, a testament to everything they had built. "You remember what you said to me the day we met?" Seth asked. "After I offered you shelter," Faith thought back across the years. "I thanked you. I told you I would find a way to repay your kindness." "And you did," Seth said. "You gave me everything, your loyalty, your love, your life. You turned a lonely cowboy into the richest man in the territory." "Not in money," Faith said with a laugh. "In everything that matters," Seth said firmly. "You made me a better man. You gave me a reason to build something lasting. You gave me a family and a home and more love than any man deserves." "You gave me all that too," Faith said softly. "You saved me, Seth. Not just from that storm, but from a life half lived. You showed me what I was capable of." "We saved each other," Seth said. "That is what partners do." They sat in silence as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had witnessed every moment of their life together. Faith felt a profound peace settle over her. Whatever came next, whatever the future held, she knew that she and Seth would face it together. They had proven that over and over again across 4 decades. The years continued to pass gently. Faith and Seth became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family that included children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even a few great-great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper under Samuel's leadership, and both Faith and Seth lived to see their youngest great-grandson learn to ride. They celebrated their 50th anniversary with the entire family gathered around them, 3 generations of Ashfords who existed because 2 people had chosen each other one dusty September day. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and tears, memories shared and love expressed. In their 70s, both Faith and Seth remained active, though their pace had slowed considerably. They spent their days in gentle pursuits, reading and talking and simply enjoying each other's company. The love between them had mellowed like fine wine, becoming something rich and deep and unshakable. On a cold January morning, Seth caught a chill that turned into pneumonia. Despite the best efforts of the doctor from White River, he grew steadily weaker. Faith never left his side, holding his hand and telling him stories of their life together. "I am not ready to let you go," she whispered one night as he struggled to breathe. "I am not going anywhere without you," Seth rasped. "We made a deal, remember? Partners." "Partners," Faith agreed, tears streaming down her face. But Seth's body was failing, and 3 days later he slipped away peacefully with Faith holding him close. She felt the moment his spirit left, felt the terrible absence where there had always been presence. The funeral was attended by what seemed like everyone in the territory. People came to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his integrity, his skill with horses, and his unwavering devotion to his wife. Faith stood straight and proud, accepting condolences with grace even as her heart shattered. Samuel worried that his mother would not survive the loss. Faith had always been strong, but losing Seth was like losing half of herself. For weeks, she moved through the house like a ghost, unable to eat or sleep properly. But then one morning, Faith woke with a sense of purpose. She could almost hear Seth's voice telling her to keep going, to finish what they had started. She rose and dressed and went to the library building. She pulled out the manuscript she had written years ago, their story, and began to read. As she read, she could almost feel Seth beside her, could almost hear his voice adding details or correcting her memory. She read about the dust storm in the barn, about two people who had found each other against all odds. She read about loyalty and love, about building something from nothing, about a partnership that had withstood every test. And as she read, Faith realized that Seth was not truly gone. He lived on in every board of the house they had built, in every horse that bore the Ashford brand, in every child and grandchild who carried their legacy forward. He lived on in her heart, in the memories they had created together, in the love that death could not diminish. Faith spent her remaining months finishing their story, adding the final chapters about their last years together. She wanted future generations to know what they had built and why it mattered. She wanted them to understand that love and loyalty were not old-fashioned concepts, but the very foundation of a meaningful life. When she was done, she gathered the family together and read them the entire manuscript. There were tears and laughter, recognition and revelation. The younger generations heard for the first time about the dust storm that had brought their grandmother to the ranch, about the struggles and triumphs that had created their family legacy. "This is for all of you," Faith said when she finished. "So you will remember where you came from and what matters most. Love each other. Be loyal to each other. Build something that will last. That is what your grandfather and I did, and it gave us the best life anyone could ask for." 6 months after Seth's death, Faith joined him. She went to sleep one warm July night and simply did not wake up. The family found her in the morning looking peaceful, a slight smile on her face, her hand resting on Seth's pillow as if reaching for him one last time. They buried Faith next to Seth on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a spreading oak tree they had planted together 40 years earlier. The entire community turned out for the funeral, mourning the loss of a woman who had touched so many lives through her teaching, her library, and her example. Samuel stood at the graveside and spoke about his parents, about the love story that had created a dynasty. "They started with nothing but each other," he said. "A cowboy and a schoolteacher who made a partnership that lasted 50 years. They showed all of us what is possible when two people commit completely to each other and to building something meaningful. We are all here because they chose loyalty and love above everything else. That is the legacy they leave us, and it is one we must honor by living the same way." The ranch continued for generations after Faith and Seth were gone, each new generation adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the foundation that had been laid. The manuscript Faith had written became a treasured family heirloom, passed down and read to every new child as soon as they were old enough to understand. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Dakota prairie in shades of gold and orange, the descendants of Faith and Seth would sometimes swear they could feel their ancestors' presence. Not as ghosts, but as a lingering warmth, a reminder that love endures beyond death, that loyalty creates bonds stronger than time, and that two people working together can build something that will last forever. The dust storm that had brought Faith Winters to Seth Ashford's barn had seemed like a disaster at the time, but it had actually been the beginning of everything good in both their lives. It had brought them together and set them on a path that would impact not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone who came after them. Because in the end, that is what love does. It creates ripples that spread outward through time, touching lives that will never know the original source but will benefit from what was built. Faith and Seth had built more than a ranch. They had built a legacy of love, loyalty, and partnership that would endure as long as there were Ashfords to remember their story. And their story, written in Faith's careful hand and preserved for future generations, would always begin the same way, with a dust storm, a desperate woman, and a cowboy who offered her shelter and ended up giving her the world.